How's it going, you lovely bunch of bakers? Welcome back to the channel. Today I'll show you how to make Napoleon cake. So let's get in the kitchen and get started. I was reminded of this beautiful cake as soon as I made my honey cake video. Napoleon is another classic cake from my childhood, and it has a similar construction as honey cake. It is made by assembling several layers of pastry with a filling sandwiched in between, and then the whole cake is covered in crumbs made from leftover pastry. Puff pastry is used for the layers, and there are two fillings: pastry cream and jam. Once the cake is constructed, it is left in the fridge for a whole day to let the pastry absorb the filling so that it becomes nice and moist. The result is a soft and very light cake, which is not very sweet, as there is no sugar in the pastry. This thing goes perfectly with a cup of coffee. This recipe uses my standard rough puff pastry. For that we'll need some white bread flour, salt, water and some butter cubes. For the pastry cream we'll need some milk, sugar, egg yolks, flour, vanilla paste and butter. And for the second filling I chose raspberry jam, but you can use any jam that you like. I like this one because it's not very sweet and it's quite runny, which made it easy to spread on the pastry. Often recipes do not include jam as a second filling, but it really helps to elevate the cake, so it's a really good addition. When it comes to the equipment, we'll need a baking tray, a few pieces of baking paper, a pot for cooking the filling, a bowl, scales, a dough scraper, a spatula for spreading on the filling, a whisk, and a rolling pin. We'll also need something for crumbling up the pastry trimmings used for covering the cake. Your best bet will be food processor, but I don't have a food processor, so instead I use this little garlic chopping gadget. You could also put the trimmings in a plastic bag and smash them up with a rolling pin. Or whatever you do, you need to get them as fine as you can. I'm going to start by making the pastry cream. It's basically a thick custard, which needs quite a bit of cooking. There is no need to temper the eggs or anything like that here. Simply combine all the ingredients except the butter in a medium-sized pan and then cook them all together. It doesn't matter in which order you add everything. It will all get mixed together as we whisk it and cook it. Once you've combined all the ingredients, set the pan on medium to high heat and then cook it for around 10 minutes until the mix becomes nice and thick. You want to whisk it pretty much continuously in order to prevent any lumps from forming. It will start boiling and bubbling, but keep cooking it until the timer goes off. This is how it will look when it's done. Once the custard is ready, take it off the heat and then whisk in the butter. The butter cannot be cooked together with the custard, otherwise the mix will split. That is why we are whisking it in once the custard is ready. And once all the butter has been mixed in, pour the pastry cream in a bowl, cover it with cling film so that it's touching the surface, and then leave it in the fridge until it's completely set. It will take some time, so you can easily make it a day ahead of time. And you can do the same with the pastry as well. And the pastry is what we are making next. In a large bowl, combine the flour, salt and the butter cubes. Give it all a quick mix. Coat the butter in the flour. Once the butter has been coated, pick it up piece by piece and break it up into 4 or 5 smaller pieces. But don't break it up too much, we want to leave it chunky. Repeat this until you've gone through all the butter cubes. Then add the water to the mix, grab your dough scraper and mix everything together. We want this dough to be quite loose, so we don't want to knead it. We just want to mix it until there's no dry flour left. Instead of kneading it, try to push it together. If there is a little bit of dry flour left over, don't worry about it. The main thing is not to overwork the dough. Once it's all nice and cohesive, wrap it up in cling film and refrigerate it for around 40 minutes. The dough will loosen up and relax during this time, which will make it easier for us to roll it out and fold it up. After the first 40 minutes in the fridge, pull the dough back out, unwrap it, dust it generously with flour and then roll it out to about 3 times its length. It will not be pretty at first. It will not be even, the edges will get cracked, but that's totally normal. Just try and roll it out to make it as straight as you can. Once you're happy with the length, straighten out the edges by hand. Place the dough horizontally in front of you and then fold it in 3 layers. First fold over one side and then fold over the opposite side. Once again you want to straighten out the edges and make it as straight and tidy as you can. Now keep the dough in the same orientation. We need to roll it out one more time. Give it a generous dusting of flour and then roll it out to about double its length. We are repeating what we did earlier. Roll it out, make sure the edges are nice and straight, place it horizontally in front of you and then fold it in 3 layers again. Now wrap it up and place it in the fridge for another 40 minutes of chilling. To make the pastry extra flaky, we must give it 2 sets of folds. So after the second chilling stage, pull the dough back out of the fridge, dust it generously with flour once again, roll it out to about 3 times its length, fold it into 3 layers, dust it with flour one more time, roll it out and fold it up once more. And by the end of it, you should have a nice neat piece of pastry. It needs to be chilled one more time before it can be used. Leave it in the fridge for at least 40 minutes. I left my pastry as well as the custard in the fridge overnight. The first thing to do on the next day is to preheat the oven to 200 Celsius, 390 Fahrenheit, fan off. Now we can move on to creating the layers. Now the pastry becomes quite puffy, so unlike my honey cake, the Napoleon cannot be made with 8 layers as it would be way too tall. So we're going to go with 6. You need to roll the pastry out quite big for this. More than 60 centimeters long and 30 centimeters wide. It will take a minute, so be patient. And try to make it as straight as you can. Now trim the edges to create a 60 by 30 centimeter rectangle and keep the trimmings as they will be used for covering the cake later. Now divide the large rectangle into 6 smaller rectangles measuring 20 by 15 centimeters. You'll find the inch conversions in the written recipe below. Dog the pastry with a fork to prevent it from puffing up too much. Now arrange the pieces of pastry in pairs on non-stick baking paper. As soon as they've been cut, they're ready for the oven, so let's get them in there. They will take around 13 to 15 minutes to fully bake. Both the top and the bottom should be nicely browned. Double check the bottom of the pastry. If it's not ready yet, flip it over and give it a couple more minutes in the oven. Once all the layers have been fully baked, stack them on top of each other. Arrange them so that the largest and straightest pieces are on the top and the bottom of the cake. Bake the trimmings for an extra 5 minutes so they're nice and crispy. Leave them to cool down and then crush them to a fine crumb. Luckily I don't use this garlic chopper for its intended purpose quite often, so my cake didn't turn out tasting garlicky. Okay, leave the pastry and the crumbs on the side. Let's get the filling from the fridge and whisk it up until it's nice and smooth and spreadable. Now we are ready to assemble the cake. It is slightly more complex than the honey cake because it has 2 fillings. We'll be spreading the custard on the top of one piece of pastry and then the jam will go on the bottom of the following piece of pastry. I've flipped the top piece upside down so we get a nice smooth surface on the cake. We'll start by spreading the jam on all the pieces of pastry except the bottom one. 1 or 2 teaspoons will be more than enough. And as I said, we want the very top piece to be facing with the smooth side up. So obviously I spread the jam on the rough side of it. And as you can see that all the other pastry layers are getting the jam on the smooth side. I sure hope that made sense. It did in my head anyway. I decided to build the cake on a piece of slate for easier handling. Plop 1 big spoon of custard on the pastry, take the spatula and then spread it out in a nice even layer. It's okay to go slightly over the edge. Now take the next piece of pastry and place it with the jammy side on top of the custard and then gently press it down. And now repeat those steps until you run out of pieces of pastry. Once you've placed on the final piece, also cover it with custard and then use the remaining custard to cover the sides. I keep saying custard, it's pastry cream. Is there much of a difference? I don't know. Anyway, carefully fill in all the gaps on the sides. It will be a bit messy, but that's normal. That's why I'm working on a tray instead of on the table. Okay, there's just one thing left to do. We need to cover this cake in crumbs. Hold the cake in your hand so you can move it around more easily. First, sprinkle the crumbs in an even layer all over the top surface. To cover the sides, take a small handful of crumbs and push them into the custard. You heard me right. Don't sprinkle them on, press them in. It's the only way to make them stick properly. Now this thing needs to rest in the fridge at least overnight. But if you can give it 24 hours, it will be even better. This will give the pastry and the outside crumbs time to absorb moisture. Once we finished assembling the cake, it was still quite fragile. But after spending some time in the fridge, it becomes nice and sturdy. And if it turned out a little bit uneven, now's the time to adjust it. You can press it and mold it in shape. The surface on my cake was quite concave, so I pressed it down to make it nice and straight. And there you have it. That's how you make Napoleon cake. It's a little bit fiddly, but totally doable. Just as with my honey cake recipe, this was my first attempt at making one. And if I can make a decent looking cake, whilst also recording a video about it at the same time, I'm sure you can do it too. The pastry is super basic and easy, the custard takes no effort, it's all about patience when it comes to assembling the thing, and then waiting for it to set. So what do you think of this recipe? Have you ever heard of it before? Have you tried it before? Let me know down in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this one, click over here. Subscribe to the channel, click right here. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.